All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, everybody, for the February installation of the Symbiota Support Group. Today we have a presentation from Wesley Knapp, who's with NatureServe, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. We just have a couple of announcements to make before we get into the presentation for the day. So if you haven't seen this come through any of the listservs yet, just so you're aware, IDIG Bio's Digitization Academy has announced its course schedule for 2025. These offerings are in English. They have also some offerings in Spanish. And so if you know anyone who's trying to kind of get started with digitization, this is something to be aware of. They're accepting applications about 8 weeks before each course offering. And then Kalina and Austin are the two contacts for that within IDIG Bio. And then unfortunately, if you haven't heard, BioDigicon has been canceled, but we look forward to offering our programming virtually per usual. So just so you know, DC probably isn't happening this year. And I think that's it for our announcements. We don't have too many this week. Katie and Jen, do you have any other announcements you want to make before we get into Wes's part of the presentation?
No, I just want to give a brief preamble into Wes's presentation.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Jen Yost and I help coordinate the efforts of the Symbiota Support Hub. And the Symbiota Support Hub is kind of interesting in that we are not in charge of your portals. You guys have, you're your own agents of your data, and then you manage and share them within these portals. And I think all of us have a very strong conservation ethic. We hope that all of the biodiversity data that we curate is used for great conservation outcomes. And so we are really excited to have NatureServe here to talk about how all of the data that we curate and put in these portals and try to make useful for research and for conservation, how does that process actually happen? And for the rarest species, there are rare species protections that various communities have decided to put in place to try to protect those species from bad actors and poaching. However, you want to get that data to the people who are using it for good conservation work, and NatureServe is one of those organizations. And so periodically over the last several years, the Symbiota Support Hub has been fielding these rare species readers requests from the heritage programs and also from NatureServe so that they can do species status reports and then do conservation. And we have had a lot of questions come up from curators who want to know more about that. And so that is the nature of today's meeting, so that everybody knows Wes, you know NatureServe, you know what that organization does, and then you can make a more informed decision when you decide to share your data or not share your data. So with that, I can hand it over to Wes.
Sure. Thanks. Let's see if I can share my screen and get this to work. Share, present. No. Oh,
Looks good. We're seeing
looks
it.
good. Great. Well, thank you for the intro. And many of you know me because I've sent out those badgering emails as a botanist, trying to annotate or look at specimens, and they've been obscured. Um, but I get to talk today about NatureServe and our role in conservation because there's a lot of misconceptions about who we are, what we are, how we do what we do. So I'm going to go high level over NatureServe, talk about what we do, and then we can have time for questions. So NatureServe, we're a conservation nonprofit. Our vision is that we envision a world in which the best available science informs conservation and stewardship decisions so that biodiversity thrives. And our mission is that we leverage the power of science, data, and technology to guide biodiversity conservation and stewardship. We've been around for 50 years. We were founded under the Nature Conservancy name and umbrella. The first member program, which we'll talk about our model in a minute, was with South Carolina. We've grown to be in every state, territory, and province up in Canada. So we work on a member program model that we don't maintain the local rare species data, but our member programs do. It's very similar to what I just heard about the Symbiota Data Hub. Our data does make a big impact collectively. NatureServe itself, we've been in the media quite a bit the last few years. You'll see some stories there and the estimated reach because we're trying to impact the public so they understand what's going on in the world around us. I was personally involved in the tree species here in the bottom left on the PBS NewsHour, and then the Trillium assessment, which was in the bottom middle, where we collected information on all the trees and all the trillium and did conservation status reports. I'll talk about more about how the data is available, but in the right here, you'll see that we are the go-to provider of information for government agencies, federal government, and we outshine a lot of other partners, even things like plants, USDA plants, which is a bit surprising because that is a governmental source of information. But this is all to say that we try to make our data available when as appropriate for people to make decisions. Now, I mentioned we work on a member program model, or we call it the network or member program model. And this is really conservation through collaboration. Each state, territory, or province has their own member program. We also have Navajo Nation as a member program and the Tennessee Valley Authority, which work with their local states to make sure we don't have duplicate data and that sort of thing. But there's over 60 programs employing over 1,000 conservation professionals. Our collective database on rare species, which again is maintained at the state, territory, or provincial level, has over 1.3 million records for on-the-ground rare species. We've assessed over 100,000 plants, animals, and habitats, and we are a founding member of the National Vegetation Classification, which is the taxonomy of ecosystems. We've classified over 7,000 ecosystems with our conservation status assessments. Now, when I talk about conservation, we talk about three basic questions. What is it, which is what species or taxon? Where is it, like geographically, and how is it doing? And we answer these questions, and we put forth conservation status assessments to talk about the rarity, threats, and trends of any plant, animal, or habitat. And when we talk about ranks of rarity, it's not just bean counting. It's rarity, threats, and trends. Because the threats and the trends to an organism can be just as informative to how imperiled it is with extinction. And NatureServe does these at three levels. We have the global level, or G rank, the national level, or N rank, or the subnational level, or S rank, which we'll talk about how those all nest in just a second. But when I talk about our ranks, remember, this isn't just bean counting. It used to be like 1 through 5 was an S1 or a G1. That's not the case. It's rarity, threats, and trends. So they're all baked into one figure to help prioritize conservation action. And these ranks, I mentioned they apply at the state, national, or global level. They work on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being the rarest or critically imperiled, and 5 being the most common or secure. And we have other categories we don't use very often, thankfully, like presumed extinct or extinct. You can have something that's possibly extinct at the subnational level. So like in a state, it could be possibly extirpated, but common at the global level. So we have different combinations that can be used on rarity, but I want to talk about global rarity today because that's what NatureServe does. Our member programs use their data to assign subnational ranks, but NatureServe, we assign global ranks. And NatureServe G ranks do crosswalk loosely to the IUCN Red List ranks. The Red List is used more across the globe outside of the United States and Canada, but when you're talking about conservation in the USA and Canada, the NatureServe ranks really do lead the way. As I mentioned, we go from 1 to 5, 1 with increasing extinction risk with extinct at the top with GX. That parallels the red list with extinct at the top, and then you have critically endangered down through least concern. So these don't correlate perfectly, but they loosely crosswalk. And when I say at risk of extinction, that's usually these plants that are possibly extinct, which may be out on the landscape somewhere. The categories G1, G2, and G3. And in the red list, they say threatened with extinction, which is critically endangered to vulnerable. Now, we've done a lot of work in the United States and Canada. We track 102,000 species and ecosystems in our database. We have 1.3 million on the ground locations. But when you have big data like that, you can do big assessments. Like how is it doing part? And that's really where conservation becomes impactful, is when you know what's rare and what needs attention. And that's where you get these summary statistics, which I'll bring up here on this slide instead. This is from the Biodiversity in Focus report that was put out 2 years ago by NatureServe, which looked at the plants, animals, and habitats in the United States. We found that 34% of them were at risk of extinction for the plants, 40% of our animals, and 41% of our ecosystems are at risk of range-wide collapse. And we know that because we've assessed really the full flora and you'll see some groups are doing better than other, like our orchids are doing much better than our cacti. Now, what are these? We have all these ranks. Well, the NatureServe ranks are really on the ground locations. NatureServe applies the which prioritize funding. This can inform your state's rare plant list. Most states have a rare plant list that may or may not be interconnected with policy. You can identify areas for purchase and action and conservation or protection. When I worked in the Maryland Natural Heritage Program or the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program, they had equations to dictate funding. And those equations were predicated on usually the G rank, the global rank of a plant, animal, or habitat, and then the S rank of that plant, animal, or habitat. So areas on the ground with rare species are often the ones we can find funding to conserve. The BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, makes their special status species list based on the G1 through G3 plants. The U.S. Forest Service has a planning rule. If you have a G1 or G2 plant in a project area, there's different planning that needs to occur. In Canada, the G ranks, the ones, twos, and threes, largely inform the Species at Risk Act and COSI species in that country. And then even independent groups like the Sustainable Forestry Initiative have compliance rules that mean that their G1 and G2 plants and plants and animals are the ones that are on their high conservation value forests. So how do we do all this? Well, I mentioned we have a network program model. So on the left, you have like the ologists out on the ground collecting data like I used to do, other external data sources like maybe y'all's, or things like iNaturalist. And that's when the member programs put that in their database. Now we have Biotics, which is our software that does all the magic, and we have the network. So we have local instances of this software in every state, territory, and province. We do continuous data exchange, so we can look at their information to rank species. We don't keep data here at NatureServe. We just exchange and look at the information to do the global ranks like you see here on the right. We push that information, the rank information, and other types of data, which I'll show you, out to Internet Explorer on Internet Explorer Pro. We do the conservation status assessments, which are the G ranks. And then we can also do custom data products for people who are interested in those. So let's talk about NatureServe Explorer and NatureServe Explorer Pro. I hope some of you have used these tools. We'll start with NatureServe Explorer, which is our traditional product that most of you have probably used. In this, here's our website, explorer.natureserve.org. If you just look at NatureServe's homepage, there's an Explorer link on the bottom. But you can search plants, animals, or ecosystems into the search bar. In this case, I looked at Helianthus verticillatus, the world sunflower. This is the type of page you'll see. You'll have the global rank at the top. This is a G1, critically endangered plant. Here's all the states it's found in. Each state has this ranked as S1. So we have a series of checks and balances where each state or member program is assigning their own S rank for the plant. And then we do the global rank. We can review each other to make sure our ranks make sense. So this is an extremely rare plant. On the left, we have all sorts of information on classification and ecology and life history, etc. And then down here at the bottom, we also list a full set of references for the information we used. This is where, if we used collection data for this assessment, where Symbiota or Support Hub could be listed as in giving credit, because this is very important to us. And we also try our best to have good references here. So if you're working on a species and you come to our website, you can find really useful information for that species. We also have Explorer Pro, which I've highlighted here at the top. This is another free product. You just have to create a username and password, and you can log in, and we can do different types of searches here. You can view locations, draw polygons, and generate reports. And I've done one for us for fun. I just drew on, this is something from the BLM. I drew a report and got a list of species on the right. Now, this is not the type of information we relay to the public. We obscure data to the public because we don't want anyone seeing things they shouldn't see. But this is the BLM, who's the land manager, and they have a special license to see that type of information. Now, I mentioned we have the two basic outward-facing free products, which are Explorer and Explorer Pro. But then we do have, if you want very explicit information, we do have the opportunity to do that, like what you saw on for BLM on Explorer Pro. And there are fees associated with that. And that is because we are a member program model. Each state, territory, or province has their own program, and some states require, by legislation, a specific amount of money to use their data for a product. So that is the only time you'll ever see fees associated with NatureServe data, is when there's a state program or a member program dictating that from above. We've done a lot in the model arena on where species are found. This map here of the map of biodiversity importance kind of showed like a biodiversity hotspot of unprotected rare species on the landscape. And it was also associated with this paper. I believe this is open access. Yes, it is. Increasing taxonomic diversity and spatial resolution clarifies opportunities for protecting U.S. imperiled species. So again, this is pretty high level. You're not going to be able to zoom in and see anything of rare or poacher or interest to poachers. But this does show how the impact of modeling in finding out where biodiversity is. And we've invested a lot in the geospatial methodology and habitat modeling for species. And I've become a big believer in this. I know when I was a field botanist, I was sometimes literally given a day to survey 1,000 acres. And that's an impossible task. But if I had a high quality, we'll call it rare plant treasure map of what could have been on the property, that would have helped me as a field botanist understand. And this data, again, this is in the local programs. So this is like the maps I'm showing here show Georgia and Florida. Each one of these polygons there is the on the ground location of a rare species. NatureServe does not maintain that information. We might use it from a member program to model, but we don't retain that. And even these models aren't just put out to the public for view, because sometimes you're modeling something like this salamander. There may be a market for this. And the last thing we want to do is expose populations of this salamander to poachers or to hobbyists. So we try our best to obscure data, make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. But something like this model, we're able to take the element occurrence data, the locations for on the ground locations of rare species, vet those through environmental predictors, using different modeling engines, which we've been on the forefront of developing to produce our models. But we all know models are only as good as the data behind it. Now, we do have the best element occurrence data, the on-the-ground location data for these rare species. Even if it's imperfect, it's still the best available data. And then we send these out for expert review. And that's where the network is really powerful, because I might not know anything about the salamander, or the person who did the model might know a little bit, but an expert herpetologist can say, no, no, this area over here, this isn't quite right. And well, you're missing an area up over here. That's where the expert review can really help. And then you have this important field validation step. We want to get these to the member programs in the network who are doing rare species inventory so we can prevent local extirpations or extinctions. They can use the model, review the model, find. We've seen many cases where new, very rare plant populations have been found and animal populations through the vetting of models like this. But where they have negative data, we can remove that from the model to greater inform our model and then do it again and make it more iterative and make it better for the future. Here's an example of a pawpaw in Florida. You see, this is a G1 plant. This is a crop wild relative, the genus, pawpaws, Simna. And this is very rare in easternmost Florida. We have very few little modeled populations where it can even be because it's a G1 plant. But there's a lot of impacts to the earth at this location. And we better be out surveying proactively for this plant using the best available data possible before all these locations are lost. Now, zooming out a little bit, NatureServe's data is really quite impressive because it's curated by all those local member programs. Each one of these states, territories, and provinces have data managers who work with the data, and they're the ones mapping these locations on the ground. And I know when I was in the Maryland or North Carolina Natural Heritage Program, there were often times where I'd find a rare herbarium, like a herbarium voucher for a rare plant. But that in and of itself isn't quite enough to make an element occurrence on the ground. You want to go to the site, you want to survey the site, see how many populations there are, and map it accordingly. But often those natural history collections can tell us something about the earth, and it might yield an interesting survey, a pointed survey, or the discovery of a high quality natural area, which we're all trying to conserve. So this map here shows the color coding of animals, birds, mammals, reptiles, freshwater and andromatous fish, butterflies and skippers, bumblebees, mussels, and vascular plants. So it's an incredible amount of data. It's really the data used to conserve the natural resources here, biodiversity in the United States and Canada. And I'm going to just end with a project I've been working on. It was one of my dissertation chapters Alan Weekly oversaw. And it's kind of trying to use all this big data with big goals and in big new ways to prevent plant extinctions. And that's a project to find the plants of one known occurrence in the United States and Canada. This is a really big collaboration with individuals across the United States and Canada to find plants of just one occurrence because they're most likely to go extinct than all others. And with We did vet herbarium data for this and had a number of emails with various individuals probably on this call to vet the identifications and make sure we weren't missing information. But the long story short is if we're going to try to prevent plant extinction, this group of organisms need our attention. They're kind of slipping through the cracks. And it's the collaborative data, the on the ground data, the herbarium collection data, the iNaturalist data that we all need to make sure we're making the best available conservation decisions. Now, I went high over at NatureServe, and a lot of the things I was told to speak for approximately 15 to 20 minutes to leave time for questions. But NatureServe does way more than I talked about today. I just tried to bring up the member programs, how the member programs maintain the data. We use the data for G rank review, global status assessments, but we do so much more. If you want to stay connected, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn. We also have an email if you want to sign up for that on our website where you can get updates on what the network is doing. So we try to highlight the network because they're the boots on the ground doing amazing things, rediscovering plants and animals and protecting high quality natural areas. Frankly, it can be a bit of good news in an otherwise dark environmental world. So I recommend if you're having a dark day like many of us are here in 2025, check out our social medias in the newsletter because it might be inspiring to see good work that's making a positive impact. And I will leave time for questions.
Thanks a lot, Wes. That was super informative.
I did see a member in the chat. Jen said that the California program CNDDB, the California Natural Diversity Database, each member program goes by a slightly different name. Many of them are natural heritage programs. California is CNDDB, Texas is Texas Parks and Wildlife. In Canada, they go by CDCs, Conservation Data Centers. So there's no one perfect name, which is why we use the network or member program to refer to the totality of the membership, because branding does become a big challenge. Yeah, Brad mentions MNFI, Michigan Natural Features Inventory, Florida's Florida Natural Areas Inventory. So it can be a tongue twister to know the name of your member program, but we do have on our website a connection. You can find us, and it outlines every member program and who's there and who to contact if you want to connect with your local member program.
Yeah, I'll say I'll put some of this in context as well, is that, one of our goals with this meeting is to help the heritage programs and NatureServe get access to the data they need to do these species assessments while honoring any type of curatorial blocks that people have in place. And so the current state of affairs right now is that if anybody wants access to, wait, let me back up even more. Some portals maintain lists of taxa that are redacted, their locality is redacted if any taxon appears on that list. The California Herbarium portal is not that. We have no redactions for rare species, but SciNet, as an example, does. And so if somebody would like to see the location of those rare species, what that person has to do is to contact every single collection to ask for rare species reader access. So that is a huge burden on that conservation biologist who's trying to figure out, are there two populations or three populations of this rare species? And so what we're trying to do, and many of you, if you are an administrator of a collection within a Symbiota portal, the Symbiota Support Hub will now send out an email that says, we've gotten a request, we've collected some information, we're going to give them access unless you opt out. And so I'm sure you've all seen those. So we've sort of taken that burden off, and now it's Lindsay's burden. but we're still trying to innovate and streamline that process. And so one thing that we would like to do with NatureServe is enter sort of an MOU type relationship where NatureServe gets rare species reader access to the data contained within Symbiota portals if you as curators will allow it. Obviously, there will be an opt-out option. And so I would love it if any curators who might have concerns about that would ask about those things now.
Yeah, and
Walter.
I'll also mention Diane. I'm not sure if Diana Soteropoulos is on the call. She works with me at NatureServe. She was curator of the Arkansas Natural Heritage Program herbarium. I hope I got that right. When she first brought this up as like a, hey, we should try to formalize this a little bit because the way it was working is like I have a login that I've curated over the years and people have given me different access, but I don't want to misuse that access. And neither does Amanda Epperly on my staff or Diana. So we want this to be very up and up and give credit where credit's due and be very careful and respectful for this relationship. So that's why we're just trying to go down this road of a more transparent data sharing kind of possible future.
Yeah, let's go with Walter and then Brad.
Thanks. Hi, Wes. I don't know if you remember me. I was a
Yeah.
natural heritage botanist here in Washington State.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a different perspective, perhaps, than some others on the call. Two comments, I guess. As a being responsible for our database here at Washington State, I don't have a problem with NatureServe or state heritage programs using our data, and I think if we can make that easier, that's fine. I recently learned that our state botanist who replaced me did not have access to our data, and kind of worked them through. Oh, here's how you get to submit the paperwork and all that. We have data from other states, besides just our state. So I think we have data that would be useful to Montana, to Oregon, Wyoming, Idaho, et cetera. So, if we can make that more readily accessible, I'm all in favor of that. It's been my experience as a heritage botanist, and my thinking's changed over the years. We often think, oh, we have to make sure nobody knows about these rare species locations, and I think it's actually just the opposite. That I think bad things happen when people don't know these things are present, and they don't know to ask. That they don't know what they don't know, and if we keep the information really tied up, more damage actually occurs. And it's I don't know about in the eastern U.S. so much. In the West, at least, we certainly have concerns about species that are legitimately at risk from overharvest. Cacti, yuccas, agaves, orchids, things like that. We don't have the same concern for perhaps things that are just on the state list, for heritage list. That might be a G5S1, at the edge of their range, things like that. So I guess I have a question to the whole network, the Symbiota folks, is I see we have data that are data secure when I enter data for different states or provinces. I'm just curious how, as you sort of mentioned earlier, that the network sort of portals sort of determine that, but I'm just wondering how frequently they are making those decisions, keeping it updated. The heritage lists change every year, usually, or every 2 years. Is NatureServe the center for information for making that decision? I'm just curious sometimes because I'll enter data for something that's actually globally quite common, but perhaps it's rare in Alberta or Wyoming or something, and it shows up as data sensitive. I'm just curious how that is decided. Is it sort of ad hoc, or how frequently it gets updated? Because these lists get old quickly. They get out of date quickly. Things are missing. New things get added. Things get taken off. So I think it's important to keep it up to date. And I'm just curious if we have a mechanism to do that.
As for the states, those state-specific checklists are managed by state, kind of just a few people who have been interested in maintaining those lists. And those people may have changed and they may not have been replaced. So I would say that they're not actually well maintained in many cases. I don't know the cases for all of the lists. And then the global one is probably kind of about the same. Like I had an email come in that said, hey, shouldn't this be on the list? And it was like a tree. And so we're like, well, it kind of depends on whether it should be redacted because it might be poached or things like that. So, but right now there's not like a centralized committee who is making those decisions.
And I guess from the portal perspective, each individual instance of a Symbiota portal maintains its own rare species list. And so the leadership of that portal can update that list as frequently as they want. And it really depends on how active that leadership group is. Let's go Brad and then Allison.
Hi. So just a comment. Even if people for Michigan data in particular, I actually I think was the one that revised our state list because they just changed the law and took some species off and whatever. So, but we actually block all of that stuff before it even gets to the portal. So if you request rare species reader status of our collection, you might be able to see stuff in Texas or Tennessee that was blocked, but it will look like the Michigan stuff will be unblocked, but it still won't have anything the image shouldn't be there, below county shouldn't be there. So this rare species reader thing doesn't really work for Michigan because we block it before it even gets there because we send our data a bunch of different places. So I don't know if people know that, but that's I don't know, and I don't know how unique we are in that way either. But getting rare species reader status won't get you the Michigan data anyway.
And Brad, are you
Um,
representing a heritage program or a specific collection in
um,
Michigan?
well, we, I think Katie, if get don't, if I'm well, tongue tied, but I think the list I use is for everything in Michigan that I put together is for all Michigan collections, not just the University of Michigan's collection. Is that right?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
yeah,
But your data is only University of Michigan
right,
data. So the only things so people who live manage in SciNet, like Michigan State,
right.
their Michigan specimens will still
They
be
would be, yeah.
accessed by those rare species. But with snapshot collections like yours, which is kind of a decreasing amount of collections in the SciNet network, a lot of them are live, then that you have that additional challenge.
Um,
That just makes me think like we need to make sure that somewhere that's articulated so that if you have somebody working in Michigan and they at least need to know that they don't have your data, you
well,
know?
all of MNFI, the Natural Features Inventory, we work really closely with them, so they just
Okay,
send us data requests separately, and I send it straight from the
great.
database. But like, it probably should be, other people should know about it, but in what way and who is that? I don't know. And then just so that was one thing that I just wanted to say and see if people had comments. But then another thing was with these rare species readers, I would kind of be more comfortable if they had like an auto expiration date. Like, hey, I'm a tech working for this state's whatever. I'm applying, but it'll go away in 2 years unless I renew it. Because otherwise, people will just be added, and then 10 years later they will still have it, but they don't work for that organization anymore. So I would just suggest that there be like an auto cutoff based on their application, and then they can just renew it. But if they move into the orchid stealing business, they don't still have their uh, whatever. Okay,
Great
that's
suggestion.
all. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. Allison, and then Anna.
Unmute. There we are. So a couple points. One is I like the idea of a blanket agreement with NatureServe or such organizations because I do get a lot of rare reader requests that don't seem to come in with enough information for me as a smallish herbarium curator to evaluate. Like I don't necessarily see the big picture, so I like the idea of like it being vetted as a block. But I also agree with Walt's point that that should apply for generally rare species, but there are these categories of highly likely to be poached species that maybe should have a separate level of protection. And I'd like to include, well, of course, there's lots with animals, but for plants also carnivorous plants and succulent plants, since they're known high likely targets, and maybe also psychotropic plants would be added to that. But I'm curious, lastly, if Wes, if you've had cases of the data getting out and being misused, either by what did it was said, like somebody decides to go into the orchid stealing business or some other way. Has that happened? And if so, like what sorts of risks are there?
I'm going to answer this really honestly. I'm looking for stories, right? Like I remember going to a meeting recently and they're talking about Chapman's orchid, and that's the kind of thing we would never publicize. And there's literally a giant roadside that says Chapman orchid don't mow. And I was like, have you seen poaching? And they're like, yeah, no poaching. So I know there's poaching out there, right? We know this. We can't deny like Venus flytraps, cacti, the list goes on and on. We need to be careful about advertising those. What I see is nefarious people who are going to break the rules no matter what's in place. And they're going to, like I heard a horrible story about turtle poaching, and they found the federal reports on the website, and they used those locations to poach the turtles. So it's not necessarily collection data. And then I know someone else who warned me, yeah, there's that pitcher plant that was described, but if I take one number off the collection record and one add a number to the collection record, it's the same spot. So that pitcher plant comes from the same spot as those two other plants. So I think there's many ways around these things. I think what we have to do though is think about what is really sensitive. Because I've seen too many times where it's like everything on the rare plant list is sensitive, but no one's going out looking for sedges. I'm a sedge lover. No one cares, right? Like there's a lot of these plants that are rare at the edge of their range, but they're extremely common in the next state over. Why am I going to go out of my way to try to find a small population at the edge of its range if it's untracked in another state? I think the whole topic of what is a sensitive species needs careful evaluation and thought, but we have to be careful. We have to err on the side of caution. I just don't know many stories other than like some cacti poaching examples, um, where I've heard of even detrimental impacts. But we catch somebody in the green swamp in North Carolina almost every year, even though you can go to the store and buy Venus flytraps. So like people know where these places are and they're still going to do the bad thing, even if they're caught. I wish I had a better solution to it, but I'm not sure if what we're doing right now is the best path forward either.
Hannah?
Hi. So I am in a bit of a unique situation. I am the data manager for the Minnesota Biodiversity Atlas. So we are a portal on Symbiota, but we do also manage our own servers. And we also have some restrictions on what we can do because we're part of the Bell Museum at the University of Minnesota, and we were created by the state legislature. And part of that is that we have an agreement with the Minnesota DNR, and we host their specimens and their data, with the agreement that we protect that data as is required of state institutions. So all rare species have to get case-by-case permission from the DNR for their data to be used for anything. So that may put a bit of a kink in terms of like our participation in any sort of MOU. So I'm wondering if you work with DNR in various states, if you have existing agreements, that might help if we decide that we're going to participate for that sort of thing.
Yeah, it sounds like you're working with the people in Minnesota that we work with, and they may even already have that information in their biotics. But what we do is in Minnesota, I mean this not to be offensive, but Minnesota isn't the place we usually see this come up. What we usually see is there's like a new treatment, very rare plant coming down the like G1, G2, and we're trying to do like not only the literature review but the specimen review to make sure our ranges are being calculated correctly. And that's where we usually bump into things that's of note and could expand the range of the species or be important, but it's kind of blocked and we just can't have access. Minnesota doesn't sound like that's the case. Like most of your floras were G4, G5s already, but if they're at the edge of their range and the location's being blocked, I'm going to assume that the S rank is in line with what the best data has for that state, and that won't really impact the G rank at that point. That's more of an edge of range thing.
Okay. Yeah, we do, from what I do know, we do have a lot of species that are at the edge of their ranges because of the ecosystems that collide in Minnesota. So we're just already at the edge for lots of things. So you may already have that data. But yeah, so that's a discussion that we can have administratively. We do redact localities automatically when we create our RSS feeds, so that populates out to the other Symbiota portals, like the Lichen and Bryophyte portals that host our data as snapshots.
Yeah, and to clarify, Anna's position is about the same as Brad's position, where you have a copy of data that's going into the Symbiota Support Hub supported portals. And so I think we're largely talking about a agreement among the ones that the Symbiota Support Hub has, administrative support of. So you would probably, like you said, have to have separate conversations with NatureServe about how they're going to access your data.
Yeah, I think we would need to arrange a conversation with all of the local stakeholders to decide whether we want to integrate that into the atlas, so that you would have direct access then. So if that's information that you're interested in having access to, I can raise that with folks here.
Yeah, I don't see why not. Let's get it above board everywhere.
James?
All right, sounds good.
Hi, so I'm in Oregon here, and we are still restricting all of this information, but we're well aware of what California herbaria are doing. But we're sort of in a situation, and I suppose many of you also are, where we have sort of two different types of specimens that have obscured coordinates. So we have stuff that's on rare species lists, and they're obscured at the taxon level. And then we have some number of records, I have no idea how many, that are obscured at the record level for a whole bunch of various reasons. They could be on private property and people don't want that getting out. They could be stuff from agencies that isn't on the state list, but the agencies want to keep it quiet for whatever reason. And I guess I'm wondering how California is handling those sorts of things while keeping everything else open. Or are you?
So collections still have the ability to, per specimen, redact any specimens that they want. So the California Botanic Garden actually was one kind of dissenter of our decision to not globally redact. And so they sent me a list of species that they want all redacted, but then they also have some land ownership things that they had me redact too. So the redaction possibility is still there, like that feature is still on, but in our community, we decided to not curate a global list, but collections can do that on a per collection list.
So do you get requests for those things?
I don't think I have seen any requests, no.
Deb's got her hand up, but I will just throw this out there for any curators, is that because the heritage programs in most states do so much vetting of every single specimen record, like they geo-reference those bad labels, and they like really try to get to the bottom of where that specimen was collected. I have tried to make those folks editors of my collection so that when they actually geo-reference it and correct all these bad things about it, that it's actually contained within the specimen record then. So like, why do all of that work if it just sits in an Excel spreadsheet in somebody's office? Like get it back to me and just edit the record yourself, because they know way more about it at that point than I do. And so that is also an option, in our future together, of just forging better relationships with the heritage program so that those people can actually do really great specimen curation for you. Okay, Deb.
Cool conversation, and thanks, Jen. Yes, and certainly that's, as somebody who's visiting, from some of you who know me from IDIC Bio, and I work in the species file group with TaxonWorks, but interested in all these topics. So this notion of including people at the source, able to work inside your data, and you're shortening the distance, right? That how many degrees can we be certain about this, and how many hands did it have to pass through? Getting that expert to do that work in one place is really cool. A couple of comments I heard along the way that I started thinking about. James, you raised this notion of private property, and some of you will know this as well, or potentially I suspect, way better than I do. I've been told that, for example, a lot of bee data that goes out the door has essentially, for the kind of purposes that Wes, they've been fuzzed to the point of it's private. So many of you know all of those issues. I don't have to explain. My comment comes along the lines of thinking about it from a long-term point of view. When a researcher fuzzes those data on purpose, when you decide not to send something out, when it's a question of land ownership and somebody like Katie gets asked to fuzz those things or block them and totally, when does that end? Where are the flags in our databases and our system processes that say that land's no longer being farmed? So now that data could go out the door. Or now those coordinates don't need to be fuzzed anymore because that species is off the list or sadly extirpated. So it's really hard to do, right? But it's another question we need to ask ourselves. There was a point about metrics. Somebody was asking, we get count toward use. And I think on the one hand, if we ask ourselves for that metric, we can say, oh, yay, we tick a box, but we have an expectation there that maybe that number is going to go up. We need to maybe think more, what are some other metrics we could be asking for? Could NatureServe turn around and tell us, when people search for our data in NatureServe and they get our data, what are they searching for? What are they looking at? What's interesting to whoever that consumer is about the data that they're grabbing? What search terms did they use to discover your data? That might be something that you could use yourselves. And in that, what could you do in terms of the data you do or don't hide or do or don't share? I think those kinds of uses could be useful to you, the data provider, as well, not only NatureServe. I'll stop there. I have some more ideas, but those are the main ones.
Thanks, Deb. Anybody want to react to that? James?
Not a reaction. So if anybody else wants to go, I just have a separate question.
Go ahead.
Okay. I had a question for Wesley. Have you gotten access to iNaturalist data on sensitive species?
Yeah, we have some member like again, I don't usually work directly with the data like that. We have many member programs you have. Like you might have heard of so it depends on where you are. Like the Maryland Biodiversity Project has done a great job getting access to that INAT data and they work with the Heritage Program. Kentucky has a wonderful INAT product. Nevada has a great one. It just Texas, the list goes on and on of great programs that are integrating with INAT data the way they work with their local herbarium or the way they're getting data on the ground from field surveys. We're trying to figure out how to crack that nut at more of a national level. But that's like we had Scott Laurie from INAT at our BWB meeting last year in Seattle. He was one of our keynotes, and we have a work group that Diane is actually a member of, trying to think about how we do a national product to lower the bar of data access. Because when we track something that's globally common, that becomes a challenge because almost no one has data on the common things. Because most of us aren't out collecting common trees or common insects. We're focused on the rare things in our regions from an inventory standpoint, and we need that data. They're the army of boots on the ground. So we're working on it. We have some fledgling ways we're doing that now, but most of our programs are leading that front.
And Wesley, if a state heritage program has the rare species data, is that enough? And do they share it with you? Like, is there also a need at the national level to have that? And does the data flow from them to you?
For their rare species data?
Yeah.
Yeah, we get to view that data. We do a data exchange for ranking purposes, but we don't keep that data. But we can point out when things are wrong methodologically, because we maintain the methods on how this stuff's supposed to be done. And then when we rank something globally, we can often provide input at the state level that something's up with the rank when you look across the data sets. But yeah, so the member programs map and maintain, and we get to like look to rank. We don't even have a way of visualizing the data on the ground at NatureServe. We just see the data behind like the visualization. Like a member program has access to a mapper and they can see the rare species. We can't do that here in Central.
And is that what you're trying to do, or is it enough if the member programs have
Frankly,
that?
ideally, I'd love to be able to do that, but that's way outside my control. As long as the member programs have that, because if they have that data, they're the local experts. And you can never replace that kind of knowledge. So, like, if I have a question in Florida, I'm talking to Amy Jenkins in Florida. Like, she's the go-to person. Like I'm going to talk to Walt's replacement in Washington. Like, that's all there is to it, because they're the main point of contact who are hopefully working with that other collaborative across the state level to make sure these ranks are accurate.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one thing that we have have had some trouble with is that at the heritage program level, there's often interns or short-term summer employees
Yeah.
who get hired to work with the heritage programs. And so, they're like this bright-eyed recent college grad and they need access to the data, so they send out a rare species request. And we've gotten some like pushback of just like, who is this like, is this real? Is this person going to have that job for more than 6 months? Like, that kind of thing. And so just in terms of trying to make it easier on everybody, I'm not totally sure if our efforts should be better spent sort of state by state, making sure that the heritage programs and their related Symbiota portal have good relationships, or if it serves us to do like one NatureServe account sort of nationally.
So there's two ways to skin that cat, and I think there's strengths and weaknesses to both. If I had an intern I trusted to do this work, I'd probably ask, I'm going to set up a state name, username,
Hmm.
and that password gets changed every 6 months. So
Hmm.
we don't have some kid who may not do this for the rest of their career or turns into a nefarious player with access in perpetuity. Like we don't want that. I'm a big fan of lowering the bars for the programs because not all programs are created equal. Like Pennsylvania has something like 27 staff and Alabama has like two.
Hmm.
Like you think about where the biodiversity is, and it's not in Pennsylvania. No offense, Pennsylvania. Like, but they just have more resources, and we have a lot of underfunded states who need access, and they don't have the ability. And then oftentimes we're in front of the curve of annotation and in front of the curve because of a newly published name, and we can lower that bar for a member program, especially if we're working on a G1 or a G2 plant or animal for that matter. If we're doing the data, we can push out to the member program. You may want to check with this repository because they have a really important record, and then they can work on that relationship with the repository. Because I strongly feel like I spent a lot of time with different herbaria in all the states I've worked in, and I think that's the best pat was kind of top down and bottom up is probably the best way to do this.
Yeah, I guess for everybody who's on the call and manages their data in a Symbiota portal, it would be very useful for Katie and Lindsay and I to hear, you're welcome to just type it in the chat, sort of, what your preferred way forward is so that we can help facilitate that. And I think what Wes just said is a great solution where if each state member program had its own login and the burden was on them to change that password every 6 months, that would remove the burden on all of the curators if you feel good about that trust relationship, and so that would be one way of doing it. The same is true for like a NatureServe user account. And so, we're just trying to figure out how to facilitate these interactions and these way forwards. And so it really does depend on what your preference is, curators. So we'd like some feedback about that so that when we get off this call, we all go, oh, well, what's next? And Katie, James is asking about API access in the chat. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, I'm typing response.
Oh, okay, great.
You can all read it.
Basically, API access will likely depend on the user permissions to a portal anyways, so you're not going to get an authentication token if you don't have a user access with proper permissions, I assume.
And Walter, API is like how computers talk to each other when we're not around.
It's how can you write a code to do the data instead of you having to go click a bunch of buttons to download the data.
James, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I guess what I was just saying about that was to give NatureServe a way to work with all the Symbiota portals simultaneously, um, in a way that most users would. Perhaps other organizations like that.
Quickly getting way above my pay grade. I don't know.
I mean, all things are possible, right? It's whatever we have the desire and will to do as a community. So that is totally possible. But we, like biodiversity data is so interesting when you think about it because we have decided that the decider is the curator. Even though it's not your collections, you might have not created the specimens, but the curators or the gatekeeper, your university might not even agree that you're the decision maker. The university or the institution might believe that they are the decider. But as a community, we default that decision to the curator of that collection. That's an interesting in and of itself. And so we want to value what curators decide to do with their data. However, we know from working in this community that most of us care about conservation and want to make sure that those data are being used in the best way possible for rare species rankings that then dictate development decisions and things like that. So is there anybody who has any concerns about increasing access to rare species data to their heritage program or NatureServe? And you're welcome. You can chat me privately about it if you if you don't want to share in the group. But that's really what we're trying to understand, right? Like we're going to move forward pursuing that, lest we hear any other technical
I
concerns.
can't tell if David's a hard no to sharing data or he has no concerns.
My guess, knowing David, is that he has no concerns.
No concerns. That's correct.
Great.
But you should ask that question when I'm not standing in front of the crowd. They might have a different response. Now, I want to be respectful to that because what I've found in my 25 years as an on-the-ground conservationist is, a lot of this is personality driven. All it takes is one bad encounter 25 years ago that we don't forget. Like I know in Maryland, there was a guy who had the job before I started there. But until I left in 2016, people would curse that guy's name. So, and it did a bad job for the Heritage Program because they just remembered that guy. So hopefully we've all grown and matured from the mistakes of the past and we're here for the right reasons. But you never know, and you should ask privately.
That sounds great. And we are right at the hour. And so, Wesley, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for everything that NatureServe does. Katie, will you put the email in the chat where anybody could reach out to us if they want to share anything privately?
And I'll say thank you and thank you all for what you do. It's really irreplaceable data y'all curate.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your February.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.